The final way in which we can compete is on the perception of quality. So again, to run through, we're all solving the same problem. We're all solving it in more or less the same way. We all have basically the same level of quality, and so the only thing left to differentiate on is perception. This is popular priced beer. Most people in taste tests cannot distinguish the difference between popular priced beers. You know, premiums versus cheap beers perhaps. Popular priced beer can't tell the difference. All the same alcoholic content, they'll all get you drunk in the same amount of time, right? Because in Ontario, beer consumption is seen as just as far away from heroin addiction. You have to buy it in a beer store. You can't just go out in a drugstore, or a drugstore can't go out in a grocery store and buy it the way you can in Quebec and other civilized places. And as a consequence, what are you left to compete on? It's all perception. Now, this may lead you to believe that it's all a matter of smoke and mirrors, but that's not the case at all. The perception of quality exists, or the gaps in perception of quality exist, because people don't always interpret information the same way. I'll give you an example. I grew up in a family that had a business for 55 years. We were the country's largest manufacturer of Chinese food. Don't say this to brag, because I had nothing to do with it. This was a business built on the blood, sweat, and tears of my father, his brothers, and sisters. You know, my generation, we're just waiting for our trust funds to kick in. Now, the funny thing about Chinese food is, if you think about it, most people are not qualified to judge the quality of Chinese food or the quality of a Chinese restaurant, right? I mean, how do we judge it? Well, it is whatever we call Chinese, I guess. And so if we did a survey, and in fact we did do a survey a while back, and we asked Canadians the question, how do you know if a Chinese restaurant is a great Chinese restaurant? And the answer came back from 84% of the Canadian population. Number one indicator of the quality of a Chinese restaurant is the number of Asians in that restaurant. Significant, because the other 16% are Asians who can really tell the difference. But for 84%, in the absence of that detailed technical knowledge, they are working off that perception. And you see, that's why you don't see Chinese restaurants advertise a whole lot. Because what would we advertise? What would we talk about? Right? What would we talk about that would convince you we have great quality? For us, advertising's a bad cost. So instead, we take our advertising dollars and we reallocate them. What do we reallocate them to? We reallocate them to hiring Asians to sit by the door. Because that's how you evaluate quality. Quality, we all know, is in the eye of the beholder, but sometimes the beholder doesn't have 20/20 vision. You know, we may lack technical competence. We may lack time. We may be under pressure to make a purchase. We may even lack interest. The other day, my wife called me up. She said, I'm going to the drugstore. Is there anything you'd like? I said, yeah, you can get me some shave cream. She said, what brand? I said, I don't care. She said, what do you mean you don't care? You're the marketer. I said, I don't care what brand you get me. Just get me some shave cream. She said, well, do you want gel or do you want lather? You know, do you want menthol, lanolin, silicone, whatever is in it? I said, look, you know, I'm Asian, right? I can shave with soap and a washcloth. You know, get me what the bald person uses for shampoo. I'm happy. You know, that will do. What's going on? Well, it's not that I want bad quality, but I have no interest in taking the time to make a rational valuation. And it is indeed in these instances that brands and marketing campaigns are most important. This is where we get rewarded for celebrity endorsements. This is where we get rewarded because we find out, how does the customer not define quality, but how do they measure its presence or absence? And once we do that, now we can play the Chinese food game. It's not that you don't want fresh food. It's not that you don't want authentic food. It's not that you don't want it made with the right ingredients, with the right technology. It's just you have no way of knowing whether or not that's happening behind the kitchen doors. And so the surrogate that you use to determine whether or not it's probable all of those good things are happening is whether there are Asians in the front of the restaurant. The question I have for you is, how do we know if a drugstore is a good drugstore? What are those visual cues that I look for? Is it pharmacists dressed in white lab coats? Is it a certain age that the pharmacist has to have? Is it separate areas to sit and do consulting services? What are those observable metrics? Because we're talking about a service which is intangible, what are those observable metrics that make it more tangible?